Although there is no specific time frame or dates pinpointed as to when the prophet Habakkuk was prophesying and ministering to his specific people group, there are some key clues given, such as a mention of a coming Babylonian invasion in Habakkuk 1:6 that we can kind of use to indicate that Habakkuk probably lived in Judah from the time of the end of King Josiah's reign, which was happening from 640 to 609 BC, or sometime during King Jehoiakim's reign from 609 to 598 BC. At this time, Egyptian forces had gone to the aid of the last Assyrian king, but were routed by the Babylonians all the way to the Egyptian border by King Nebuchadnezzar. So at this time, probably most likely, just like Jeremiah the prophet, he probably lived to see the initial fulfillment of his prophecy when Jerusalem was attacked by the Babylonians in 597 is the best guess for when this prophet was prophesying to his people. There wasn't all that much that was given as information about the prophet that was personal or biographical, but what I could collect was that he was a contemporary of Jeremiah and a man of rigorous and vigorous faith that was rooted deeply in religious traditions of Israel at this time. Some have ran around with the idea that Habakkuk could be the son given to the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings 4. And this story basically said that in 2 Kings, Elisha's words could be translated to, "You shall embrace a son," and Habakkuk's name directly translates to the word embrace. Rabbinical tradition also backs up this claim, so that is a reason that some people might say that he was the son given to the Shunammite woman. If this was true, that would mean that he was given to an older woman who took the prophet Elisha and provided for him, and that this son was a miraculous gift from the Lord because of her kindness in that way. So that kind of adds a little context, but once again, this was not confirmed. This was just an idea that some scholars have contemplated with over studying it. We do know that unlike other prophetic books that are mostly offering warnings or judgment from the Lord against corrupt nations, this book in particular is a compilation of the prophet's laments, his questions, and his direct conversations with the Lord about seeking justice and finding justice for his people. He questions God's goodness because he's seeing so much injustice around him and evil and tragedy in his world. But we do know concretely that he was a prophet and a poet, and it can be inferred that kind of a fun fact about him from Habakkuk 3:19 is that he probably played stringed instruments, because it mentions it in that verse. But from his writings, we can tell that he was bold in addressing the Lord with his questions, which normally means that he had a pretty strong relationship with the Lord, and was comfortable in questioning him in such a bold way. As I mentioned before, the time in which Habakkuk was prophesying and ministering was a tumultuous and devastating time in the socioeconomic state of the kingdom in which he was serving at that time, and that is why a lot of his prayers and words that he had written down were that of lament and confusion and frustration with God for seeing the horrific things that were happening. This book is not like others that we're seeing in these prophet books because most of his writings were laments and not words and warnings of judgment for the people from God. They're mostly a compilation of his frustrations and his big questions about the injustice and evil and tragedy of the world that he was seeing during his time of ministering to those people. Interestingly enough, there was some extra biblical resources in archaeology that we can point to the credibility of Habakkuk as a book. A portion of Habakkuk was found among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls dating to mid-1st century BC. This scroll had a written commentary of Habakkuk that includes Habakkuk 1 and 2 with line-by-line commentary. Habakkuk 3 is not included probably because it was seen as being its own work, kind of like a psalm apart from the visionary chapters of 1 and 2. But the Habakkuk scroll has revealed the way that the Essene people and community understood and read scripture at that time, which is super cool and definitely sets Habakkuk out apart from the rest of the prophetic books.
So Habakkuk in this time is really interesting because it was focused a lot on justice, a lot of social justice. So his message to the people in the context was really focused on, kind of similar to Job in a way, of why are the evil prospering and God's holy people suffering? Why are we struggling and why are they prospering? Because there's just a lot of unjust things that were going on in society. Israel at the time was just filled with sin and idolatry and lots of just terrible things, not God's way, not the way that he wanted them to live. So Habakkuk was wondering why all of this was going on. Like, how can a righteous, just God exist at the same time as all of this sin and unhealthy ways religiously, and the temple being destroyed, like religiously, not physically. But so he was wondering why all of that was going on. And then he was wondering why the Babylonians, who were not Yahweh followers, who were not Christian people, were just going to get in and take the victory. Like, why do they get to succeed and we get to fail? Because at the reality of it, he's doubting God's power. He's doubting his justice. And he was wondering, how can this unjust society live at the same time as a just God? But the difference between him and Job is Habakkuk was focusing on political justice. So his story was within his family. He was like, why is this happening to me? Like, why is my family getting taken away? My possessions getting taken away? But Habakkuk was wondering, why is this nation getting destroyed? Why is this nation being sinful? Like, why is all of this happening to us politically and religiously rather than just focusing on my family? So that's kind of what he was focusing on personally, societally, religiously, was the idea of justice and the purpose of it all. But that's what he confronts, kind of sort of theologically in this way, as we can take it theologically in the message for us today later on. But he focuses on, how is God's power almighty? How is it real and just if all of this is going on? So the theology of that would be, well, how is that? How do those equal? How are those the same? How can a God who's supposed to be perfect and all-knowing live and sit with himself if all of this sinful and all this sin is going on in his people? And how is he going to let a non-Christian people, a non-Yahweh following people, just come in and succeed? How are they getting success and we aren't? So it's like, how can a just God dwell in an unjust world? That's the theology that is being addressed in this book. So that was the main point, which he comes from an Isaiah theology background. So it was like, God's going to provide for us. He's going to save us. The just shall live by faith is one of the main things that I really saw in my study, in my researching, that was the main line in this. And so it was, he comes from an Isaiah theology prophet background. So like, why doesn't God just save us? Why doesn't he come in and rescue us rather than sending us to doom? Because social justice is the main theme here. Is Habakkuk is searching for justice in his own society, as in all these people are disobeying God, and all this is happening. This is terrible. But at the same time, he's also wondering why evil is going to prosper when they take him over. Then the content of this book is actually really interesting, and how it is laid out literaturally. I'm not sure if that's a word, but the first chapter section of this book is basically theology about Habakkuk questioning God. He's like, how is this happening? How is all of this sin everywhere? Don't you see this violence? Don't you see this disobedience? How is this going on? How is this happening? And God's like, I'm raising up the Babylonians. He was like, I'm going to just basically destroy your land, and then I'm going to save you in the end. Righteousness is going to win out in the end. And Habakkuk is like, well, are you just going to wipe us out? Like, have mercy on us, basically. Which leads into the second stage, which is like an oracle in a way. Kind of like an elaborate debate, in which the traditional theology of justice is like sort of questioned. Is it's like, how is, like, we as the righteous people of God should be saved because we are righteous, instead of the evil people succeeding, the Babylonians succeeding. But then the third stage leads into Habakkuk's praise, and then his faith, as in, like, even if this is going to happen, even if the sin is going to continue and we're going to be destroyed, like, you are God and you are just, and I'm going to have faith in you, and I'm going to believe that you are who you say you are, I am. And that's what it really meant to the people in this time.
When looking at the book of Habakkuk as a whole and applying it to our own lives today, one can understand that there are a lot of significant truths that hold to each individual and different communities of faith. Habakkuk is a prophetic book, and some of those truths are more generalized, which would include that God is just and righteous. We see that the prophet Habakkuk questions God about the injustice he sees around him, but he eventually comes to the realization that God is just and a righteous person, and that he will bring justice in his own time. Another point in the book of Habakkuk is how faith is such a vital and important and essential part of life. In Habakkuk's journey from doubt to faith, there's faith that is essential in our relationship with God, and that's apparent through the words of the book. Sometimes we may not understand God's ways, but we must trust in his goodness and love for him to take care of us. Third main point that I see in the book is how God is sovereign. Habakkuk learns that God is in control of all things, even when there's chaos and evil prevailing. We can take comfort in that fact and know that nothing can stop God, and he is in control of all things. On more of a personal level, the book of Habakkuk challenges us to live before God with our faith. When we don't understand what is happening around us, we don't understand the trials, the tribulations, the hardships that are facing us, we can know that this doubt is part of our journey with God. It is okay to doubt. It is okay to wonder, God, why is this happening to me? That's a natural human thing to happen. However, when that happens, we still have to cling and put our faith, hope, and trust in God, and trust in his goodness, and trust in his plan that he is in control of everything. Habakkuk uses the example of wrestling with God, and that it can inspire us to be honest with God about our doubts and our fears, our worries, what we're dealing with every day. But we still can trust in his sovereignty and love, and there's beauty in that picture and image. On more of a broad scale level, or generalized to massive people, Habakkuk challenges us to live in a community of faith with other faith believers. It shows us that we are not alone in our struggles, and it is okay to lean on others and have them help us in our own walk. And it also tells us how we can support one another. When one of us is struggling, we can walk aside someone and show compassion to them and show them God's love and mercy. Because we are not called to live this life on earth alone, afraid. It's a journey together with other believers and with God. And the prophet's example of questioning God can also inspire us to ask difficult questions about our faith, to challenge ourselves. But at the same time, we need to seek God's guidance as we work to live out his purposes together with other believers. As I just said, our life is not meant to live alone in isolation. We are called to walk alongside other people and have them in our life. So when we have questions, when we have things that we need to bounce off of other people, we can go to those people in our life. And finally, the book of Habakkuk also reminds us how God's justice is not just for individuals, but it's for communities as well. And that when we work together and we must work together to promote justice and righteousness in our world, the world becomes a better place. And maybe that sounds a little cliche, but the truth of the matter is that in order to get justice, righteousness, and peace, and all these ideas that the world has been so longing afterwards, we have to trust God. God doesn't offer that just to an individual on a personal relationship, but he offers it to people. He offers it to communities, offers it to the areas, the countries, the nations. God is a God of justice. He's a God of peace, and he's a God of righteousness. Sometimes we just have to let him in and let him work. Instead of trying to do things on our own, I think the book of Habakkuk is a really great example of how we need to let go and let God. The world may tell us that we're not qualified enough, that we're not good enough, but God never used polished people. He used people with mistakes, and we should take joy in that because no one is perfect and we all fall short of the glory of God. Yes, we may question, why, God? Why are you doing this, like Habakkuk did? But those questions will turn into answers eventually. Even when we don't see it, maybe it takes a long time, God is working behind the scenes, and we need to trust him as he does that. So in short, the book of Habakkuk, applying it to our own lives, is really just to let go and let God. Let him work. Let him transform you. Let your questions and doubts be a stepping stone into the next chapter that God has for you. And that's the encouragement of the book of Habakkuk in a nutshell a little bit. Thank you for tuning in, and have a good one.